Thanks for giving me this opportunity. I was told that I'm given 20 minutes. I'll just put my watch on. I was also made to understand that I must speak as somebody from outside the system, and also ensure that I present things that will make it easier for the public to understand the report, and also identify areas that the report might be silent on and the public is interested in those. That was the mandate. And fortunately this morning, Dr. Vijay Reddy has already touched on some, so I'm not going to repeat what she said this morning. And also, I think Yancy also touched on some of those. Now, without further ado, my personal journey, I think, has already been explained. So given the mandate, in addition to the brief that was given to me, I also indicated that there's some literature that might be silent in the survey report, and that I could highlight those, because sometimes we tend to reinvent the wheel because we are silent on some of the things that have happened in the past, and by not lifting them, somebody in future might think it never happened and therefore reinvent the wheel. So I'll do that for the sake of probably the next survey report in 2027, and synthesize that into the report and make recommendations for the sessions in the 2 questions. And so this was, as I mentioned, I think if one reads the report, the first thing that I think Dr. Vijay Reddy did this morning was to share with us her or their understanding of science. And it is very broad. It covered almost everything other than faith in God. But if you look at DAXT at the beginning of 1994, because science was managed by DAXT, Department of Arts, Culture, Science and Technology, they were concerned at the time that the public do not have a relationship with science. Either they're ignorant or they have a sort of a negative attitude. And there was a public understanding of science, engineering and technology program to promote that public understanding. So there was a concept of public understanding. And then there was a YEST, Year of Science and Technology, to promote science across the whole nation. And there was an evaluation that was done of YEST. And one would have thought that this report will also lift some of these public awareness reports and use it as a baseline or as a desktop study. And then it was critiqued later when the Department of Science and Technology was established in 2004, that public PSETA, it was, as it was known then, that it was based on a deficit model. And therefore we need to move from that model. Let us now move towards edutainment model and promote science literacy and demystify science. And so the notion of science awareness came in. And I think that is where it was came. And then there are some strategic interventions that we are silent on in the report, like the Youth into Science strategy that was approved by Cabinet, which promoted especially establishment of an infrastructure and a massive infrastructure in the country to promote science awareness. And the DG at the time, Dr. Rob Adams, signed with Mr. Mseleke as 2 DGs of Science and Technology and Education to work together as a collaboration agreement. They agreed on interventions, resources that must be invested. So I think these investments, when we look at a survey of this nature, we want to see, do we have returns on these investments, even if it's just national? And also now science engagement. I think you see a conceptual evolution of these notions, so that when we start to do a survey, we have looked at how we have evolved in terms of naming this thing, from PSETA to science awareness, science engagement, and obviously science literacy, science awareness, etc. So I thought I should mention this because towards the end, when I make the recommendations for the groups and maybe beyond this conference, we might be aware of this. Now, given that conceptual evolution, there was also a policy evolution. And in the policy evolution, you see these concepts embedded in the policies. And there were some where there is green, it means there are some silences in the report about some of these policy interventions that were done. And to what extent have they contributed towards the findings of the report? I'm sure it's not what the survey is interested in, but because it is mentioned in the report that we had these policies, the silences need to be lifted. And somewhere when you do desktop studies, there are some reports that were done and the evaluations that were done, some baselines exist. So my understanding is that this survey now is now giving us as a baseline. And then an indicator, a good indicator will have two things. It must have a baseline and it must have a target. So in 2027, now that we've got a baseline, what are we targeting? Come 2027, we look back, are we improving or are we not improving? That is a very important question. So towards the end, I'll try to raise it, but will not be able to deal with it here. But I think beyond the conference, it's something that we need to look at. My brief was to look at trust and confidence. And you look at the report, it looks at trust in science and individuals. It might be scientists, traditional leaders, priests, preachers, and so on. And confidence in institutions, science councils, and etc. And obviously when you push it to the extreme, you might even go towards faith. And the creationists will be happy. You are talking about the right wing. And so the creationists sit there in the faith domain. And then you've got evolutionists maybe on the left with science, and those are the two. So trust and confidence, I think it gives us the results, and you've got this balancing act around trust versus confidence, and individuals and institutions. And it's the same thing that you have in government. You had, when we're looking at performance, and you'll find that two departments, you had a DPSA, which is looking at performance of individuals, and then we had the presidency, which is looking at the performance of institutions. And there was sometimes a tension. You'll find that a person is getting distinctions, but the institution is not performing. Or the institution is performing well, but everyone is failing in that institution. And so they've got this balancing act of trust and confidence. I'm left with 10 minutes now. Yes. And when you look at the results, they seem to be exposing to us issues around access, redress, equity, and socioeconomic status. And you'll find that certain people who are in certain socioeconomic strata seem to be having a certain type of trust or confidence in the science or science institutions, and those who are belonging to certain strata. So it means there was this, but also sometimes according to race, etc. So I think going forward, it's going to be very helpful to look at those that are left behind or are below the others, those strata that it means we need to be more targeted as we go. Now, in short, because now I was requested just to share the questions, 2 questions for the groups. In short, I think this was mentioned by Dr. Redin, Vijay Reddy in the beginning, and for trust and confidence, we can say the public have a relatively high level of trust in scientists. And then I think they do unpack and say only half perceive scientists to be honest, and 2/3 concerned that scientists keep their work secret, etc. So this was mentioned, I think, in the report. And also Vijay also highlighted it. I'm just re-highlighting it again because when I go to the slide with questions, we know where this issue is coming from. And again, the SES, socioeconomic status, seem to be also playing a role. Trust. Most trusted institutions, as she said in the morning, again, just to reiterate, universities and research institutions, and the lowest, we need to look at government. And so somewhere we need to ask the question in the working group around government so that we can raise the trust and confidence in government and traditional leaders, and so on. Right, I'm left with 3 minutes now. Recommendations. If you look at the HSRC report, it makes recommendations around those areas. And here I'm just raising questions so that we could, based on the recommendation, we can drill it down a bit to be more specific if we're going to make a difference in 2027. So the first one is that let's increase public awareness and education programs to increase science knowledge among all through multiple traditional and social media. Right. Obviously, it's a very broad, you don't know who's going to account for this, who's going to be responsible for it, and who has contributed to high trust in and confidence in the system. But I think because government has created, especially the former Department of Science from 2004, has been investing in creating an infrastructure and also supported establishment of professional associations. If you really want to go mass in terms of making science awareness, the most important professional is a teacher. In every corner of the country, there's a teacher. And they are organized in the form of professional associations. So if you've got 300,000 or so members of belong to professional associations, let alone social media, but because these professionals have knowledge, they've got expertise, they've been trained, and they are better vehicles. And some evaluations were done on their role in science awareness using the infrastructure. Why don't we look at the role they can play going forward, but also the evaluations that were done before? If we're going to have that survey, let us ask the question around this area. The second one, because we are limited to 2 questions given the time constraints, but I think even beyond today we need to revisit some of the points that have not been dealt with thoroughly in the conference. So there's also a recommendation to roll out supplementary tuition. I think it is found to be playing a major role in supporting education interventions. But there was silence around, because supplementary tuition must be done, it's an intergovernment collaboration. If the Department of Science and Technology and Innovation is going to roll out, it means it must collaborate with another department, especially education. But this, in 2003, already there was an agreement between the accounting officers of the 2 departments. To what extent has this enabled, and to what extent must it continue to do that kind of job? Because then you are able to reach millions of learners who are going to benefit from these interventions. So given this background, I did indicate that if indeed we are going to check whether we are making progress or not in 2027, what would be the targets that way? And then our research council will come back and say, let us look at whether we are making progress or not, because we'll be having targets, baseline, and we'll have targets. And that will be the responsibility of, obviously, of the responsible institution. Use the baseline, and then given this baseline, target. And then we can now know whether we are improving or not. So the questions, I think, that given this background, would be what should be the role of a network of science centers and professional associations in enhancing trust and confidence in science? And how should intergovernmental agreements, not that we must establish them, they exist, whether they are working or they are not working. If they are not working, how can they be exploited to enhance trust and confidence in science? Chairperson, I think you have done it in 20 minutes. I think I deserve a round of applause.